Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm John Updike. I'm the president of Open Primaries. Great to see all of you. It's a great turnout today. As Russ mentioned, we're here to talk with Chloe and Canyon about their new book, Dirt Road Revival. It's a really, really great book that opens up a conversation about so many important things that need repair and growth in the way we do politics in this country. By way of introduction, Chloe is the state senator in Maine of, as she calls it, Lucky District 13. And Canyon was her campaign manager back in 2020. And they've taken their experiences and written this terrific book. And I have a bunch of questions for them, and then we're going to open it up for all of you. But before we do that, Chloe recently made a trip out to Los Angeles to talk with Bill Maher. And I want to show a quick clip of that conversation. Take it away, Russ.
What do you say to the person who, like, you knock on the door and they say, "Oh, wow, you look like a Democrat." And they start to slam the door.
Yeah.
You said this happened, right? And you're like, "Wait a second, I just want to talk." And they, "Okay, I'll let you talk.
Yeah.
Here, have some of the moonshine." And you ask them what their issues are, and they say, "Well, I hear a lot about white privilege. Have you looked around my trailer? Does it look like I'm privileged?" What do you say to that person? Because that's the voter you have to get in the Democratic Party.
Well, I think that's part of it, right? Is that in rural America, folks are feeling like there is a lot of unseen struggle and pain and the reality that folks are living.
Right.
And that's a real struggle, and that's a real reality. It also means that people of color in our country are also struggling. Those realities can exist at the same time. And I think there are these narratives that are pitting us against each other, that are creating these decisions about, you know, how our money is invested and who gets what resources. But what I try and do, and what our message is that we live in a very wealthy country, and there is enough resources to go around, and we can only find that common ground. We can only create that space for unity if you are face to face with someone having an honest conversation.
Like we did. Thank you very much.
So that clip, I love that clip for a couple reasons. First of all, Chloe, you gave, I think, just a really accessible expression to shifting and changing the culture of politics, going up against the narrative that we are almost kind of genetically meant to be pitted against each other and divided against each other. And the other thing is you came face to face with snarky liberalism, with this kind of, you and Canyon rail against this in your book, which is the posture of the liberal establishment, the liberal elite towards rural America. And that clip, in my mind, kind of put your whole book into a 60-second video. So talk about the liberal posture towards rural America. What is it? What do you see? What do you experience?
Oh, that's such a good question, you know, and I think, first of all, I think it's important to differentiate between, I really like how you called it a liberal posture. In my mind, I kind of think of it as how the National Democratic Party has positioned itself over many decades. You know, there's a big difference between that and that reputation, and then the amazing work of folks on the ground doing what me and Canyon did and just having these conversations every day. Those are two very different things. And so I think that national reputation is really damaging, and it makes on the ground work so much harder, so much more difficult to find that common ground and have a conversation. You know, and I think that clip actually said it really well about what this liberal posturing is. It's like kind of looking down on rural folks and the stereotypes of rural America. You know, and kind of looking back on that clip, all of rural America is not white either, you know, so I think when we think of rural folks, we think of like a white
Right.
person in a trailer farming, you know, or whatever stereotype it is. And I think it's just really damaging. I think we also have some intellectual stereotypes about rural America. Potentially the most popular one is that rural folks are voting against their own self-interest. Like rural people aren't like educated enough or have access to enough information to make decisions. And that's also such a condescending, counterproductive narrative. And we've seen that kind of echoed most infamously in Hillary Clinton saying, you know, that Trump supporters were a basket of deplorables. So this is a rambly way of saying that over the past few decades, there have been messaging and speeches and phrasings that have really trickled down to how rural folks interact with and see the Democratic Party. And that has been part of what has really pulled folks away from voting for a Democrat, even if it's a good Democrat.
Anything to add, Canyon?
Yeah, I mean, not really. That's so spot on. I think it's, you know, it hasn't been a very intentional thing on the part of, you know, liberal pundits and the Democratic establishment, but it's really gotten through in a way that rural people feel just very, very overwhelmingly talked down to and written off as these stereotypes and tropes. And you know, it's really hurtful to people, and it comes through often just in little off the hand cuffs from a party leader, and it's inflamed by the stories that we tell in mainstream media as well, I think, and it gets through to people and it hurts, and it's no surprise that there's a backlash to that.
You know, let me run something by you and see what you think of this. One of the things you keep coming back to in your book is this sense of abandonment. And you paint pictures of just what that looks like in day-to-day life in rural America. I know what that looks like in the Bronx. And in reading your book, this idea came to my head, which is that one of the ways that abandonment looks like, in addition to all the policy abandonment or just straight out economic abandonment, is that the whole culture of politics has been reduced to winning. And you talk a lot, winning is everything in American politics. It's all that matters. And you talk in your book a lot about running your campaign, Chloe, in a way that was about much more than winning or losing. It was about helping people develop a voice. It was about listening. It was about co-creating. It was about community building. And are you optimistic about the chances to build that kind of political culture in the country, given how dominant winning is? Are you hopeful about that?
I think it's a necessity. You know, I'm not sure if it's a matter of hope or not. I think it's really what's needed. And if we're going to start kind of shifting things back at the state level and the national level, it may not look like wins. It's going to look like margins. So, you know, that's so important. And I think there's just incredible models of it everywhere I'm looking these days, you know, of campaigns that are really rooted in community and are a public good, candidates who are really authentic and bringing a different type of voice to politics. You know, and your question also made me think of AOC and the incredible movement that she built when she was running for the first time, even though no one thought that she was going to win, and how durable that movement has been in her community. I think she also had a quote from that great documentary about her that was something like, in order for one of us to get in, 10 of us have to run. So I think it's about getting lots of folks to run for office, but it's not feasible or accessible to everyone. And so, you know, part of our message is we have to have these movements that are really have space for everyone to get engaged in a meaningful and effective way.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And adding on to it, I think, you know, so many people are just repulsed by electoral politics because of how toxic and negative and rooted in personal attacks it's become. And, you know, my dad's 85. He talks about growing up that, you know, the kind of personal attacks that we see today would have just torpedoed a candidate back then. And you know, I wasn't there. I don't know how true that was across the board, but you know, it makes sense to me. And I think Chloe and I approached the campaigns from a point of view of how can we run a campaign that's 100% positive and leaves the community in a better place at the end of the campaign than when we started, no matter what. And folks really responded to that, especially in 2020. We got so much feedback from voters at the doors and from emails in response to the mailers and messaging that we sent out, and just the overall commitment to staying positive amidst a climate in 2020 that was, you know, we had a really contentious US Senate race in Maine, and then obviously the presidential race, and folks were just getting bombarded nonstop by attack mailers and attack ads. And folks really noticed the difference in messaging, and I think responded really positively to that. So that gives me hope. And I think we just need to buck the consultant class that kind of says you can't win without tearing down your opponents, and just more people making the foray into doing it differently.
Well, let's talk about that what you're up against. I read a review of your book by a journalist in Maine, who also, I read in his bio, is the communications director for the AFL-CIO up in Maine. And I thought it was an interesting statement. I'm going to summarize. He basically said, we love Chloe. Chloe is great, but she's wrong. We Democrats already know what we're doing. We know how to connect with rural people, and she's overstating the case. And I'm reading this review and had just gotten off the phone with the folks at Oregon Open Primaries who are advancing a ballot measure there and are being challenged by the unions, and folks in Nevada who have put a referendum on the ballot for open primaries and are being challenged by the unions. And I'm not anti-union. I've never crossed the picket line, and I never will. I'm pro-union. But I think reading your book, looking at these things, part of me says, are there elements of the Democratic Party, the traditional kind of stakeholders of the Democratic Party, that are more committed to maintaining a certain status quo in which they have a niche than kind of embracing new, more democratic, more open ways of doing politics, of communicating with people, of connecting with people? That's what I see from my vantage point. Talk about what resistance you're meeting within the Democratic Party to your message.
Yeah, I mean, first off, ton of respect for all of the organizers at the AFL-CIO and the folks in the state parties and the local county Democratic parties that have been, carrying our democracy on their backs for years. But I think in response to what you're talking about specifically, the person who wrote that review, I think, is very much tied up in the status quo, as you called it, the kind of the Democratic establishment that has a lot at stake in maintaining things as they have been. And it's a pretty age-old story of, when folks challenge that, they respond really forcefully, and they don't take feedback and critique well. And that's all the more reason to keep on pushing the needle, moving the needle. And I think we need more young people, especially like Chloe, in office and running campaigns that are willing to stand up to that and show a more positive way forward.
Canyon said that all perfectly. I think it's definitely no secret that Democrats struggle in rural America and the consequences that that's having across the country, and I think there are, incredible examples of folks who are also going against that trend, and doing deep work year after year, cycle after cycle to get Democrats elected. All of that is, both of those realities are existing at the same time, which is very sad and exciting. I think from our perspective, that this is not something that we had expected, but when we started running in 2018, having conversations every single day with folks who had never been canvassed by a Democrat or hadn't been canvassed in a decade, since Obama's amazing movement building campaign in 2008. Oh, I hear that I'm cutting out a bit. Well, hopefully it fixes
I think
itself.
I think it's just keep going.
Okay. Anyways, oh yeah, that was so shocking to us. Like, wow, we're having incredible conversations with folks who Dems have never talked to before. And that's not a tear down on the Democratic Party. That's a hopeful message of saying, wow, look at all of this space that we have to have conversations with folks who aren't going our way, but who definitely could if we just have an honest conversation.
Got it. So Maine now has open primaries starting in 2024. Chloe, you were not just the sponsor of the bill, you were the ferocious champion who really played such a key leadership role in making that happen. And starting in 2024, 350,000 independent voters will be able to vote in all phases of the election process. How did your experience campaigning, running for office, turn you into an advocate for open primaries? How did that become an issue that you embraced and championed?
Just before I answer that question, Caitlin Lacasse is also on this call, who I don't know if I was a champion of it. I think she was the champion of it. So there's definitely so many people who made it happen in Maine, and she was one of the top ones.
Oh, definitely.
So I just want Caitlin to get all the recognition she deserves. I had heard of open primaries before, and we actually had voted on it in 2018 during my first term, and it didn't pass. But I kept hearing it when I was canvassing folks in my Senate district, which is about a third Republican, Independent, Democrat. So it just kept coming up, and I've had a commitment to really sponsoring bills that are directly impacting my community or come from my community. So when I got elected to the Senate, I was really excited to sponsor the open primaries bill and work on it, because it's a huge issue for my community, Maine overall, as well as about a third independent. So just from conversations, people notice it when you were talking about abandonment before, John. That's like the same theme of like, wow, a third of voters in my home state can't vote in pivotal elections. That doesn't make you feel abandoned. I don't know what would.
That's so interesting, because I think that's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about primary reform, is that it's not a reform that was invented in a classroom somewhere. It really has bubbled up from ordinary people all over the country saying, hey, I'm an independent. I want to be treated as a full citizen. I want to vote in every election. Just because I don't want to join a party, don't relate to me like a second-class citizen. And finding ways to give expression to that is really exciting. Chloe, I wanted to ask you about a policy success of yours. You passed the Maine Green New Deal. And you talk about this a little bit in your book, and I wanted to learn more about how you did that in Maine that was distinct from kind of the national conversation, and things that you think people might take from that experience. So can you give us just a little flavor for that?
Sure. In the same spirit of what we were just talking about, when I ran in my first term, I rarely heard people talk about climate change, even though, the climate crisis is one of the main reasons why I ran for office. But I did hear people in my community talk about, wanting sustainable jobs and good industries in rural Maine, about how hard it is to farm with the droughts, and how the ice just isn't the same for ice fishing as it was when we were growing up. So these were all ways that I heard people talking about climate change without actually saying those words. And I feel like it's just kind of a forgotten narrative to some extent in the climate movement, that can often be very focused on numbers and data and not so much personal experience. So when I got elected, I really wanted to draw attention to that different way of talking about climate change from this rural working perspective. So I worked with the unions, the Maine AFL-CIO, to create a bill that would establish a Green New Deal for Maine. It was very targeted, it didn't try and tackle the breadth of what the National Green New Deal did, but the spirit was there of trying to say, okay, we need to be confronting the climate crisis in a different way with different allies and bringing folks to the table who are traditionally not there. So that's what we tried to do.
That's important, and it seems like a case study in the importance of bringing people to the table that are not normally there. I mean, that's in so many issues that we try to tackle as a country, we get nowhere because the wrong people, it's not the wrong people are at the table. The table is not open to a broad cross section of our diverse country, and really want to commend you on that. All right, I want to ask some kind of gossipy dirt questions, and if you don't feel like answering them, that's fine. But I inquiring minds want to know, and this comes directly out of your book. You talk about the dismantling of the Obama apparatus after 2008, Camp Obama, and this potential moment for progressive organizing to make significant inroads in parts of America where, Democrats, progressives were not doing well, and that being kind of systematically dismantled. So what was that about? Obama got more votes than John Kerry, than Al Gore in rural America. And yet there was, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there was almost kind of a message saying, we are not going down that road. So what was that about?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question, and I wasn't there on the inside, and I'm not sure to a large extent, but what we do know is Obama ran a tremendous grassroots organizing campaign, and it touched pretty much every part of the country, and there were tens of thousands of people who organized on that campaign who were ready to go and keep organizing after the election, who were reaching out and being like, okay, what's next? And one of our close mentors, Marshall Gans, was one of the architects behind that campaign, and I know he was really frustrated by the lack of carrying the organizing infrastructure forward after Obama was elected. And I'm not sure what happened. I think largely President Obama turned his focus towards governing, which makes sense. He had a big job on his plate, but for some reason the organizing piece of it was neglected, I guess, with the idea that it would just be fired up again in 4 years. And I think that was a huge mistake. And one of the things that brought us to this work is seeing the need for organizing outside of office, as well as having strong champions in office. Right. We can't put away the organizing infrastructure when November comes.
Talk to me about Trump-Sanders voters. This is something you mentioned in your book. It pops up in the media every now and then, but I've not read anything where there's kind of a serious attempt to talk about the fact that millions of Americans voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary and Donald Trump in the general election. And it's almost like it's written off as like, that doesn't fit the narrative about who Americans are, so we're just going to kind of ignore it. But you both kind of came face to face with that. Share some insights about how the media they relate to these people like they're freaks of nature, but this is actually millions and millions of people. What would you say about the kind of Sanders-Trump phenomenon?
I think Chloe probably has the best perspective on this. I'll just say briefly is I think that both of them called out a lot of gap of establishment politics and came at it from the outside and really tapped into the deep frustration and anger that folks have with kind of the status quo candidates and the status quo political system that we've been up against for a long time.
Yeah, I think Canyon is right on. You know, it was so, and it was more, I don't know, it didn't surprise me too much that folks would vote for Trump or Bernie. You know, I think like the attention on policy is often not as prominent as attention to values. And so I think like kind of front facing that Bernie and Trump did exactly what Canyon just said. I was really interested in how when people compared Bernie and Hillary, you know, there was a wild chasm there, and people wouldn't consider voting for Hillary even though they had considered voting for Bernie. And I think that comes back to exactly what Canyon said about establishment politics and just like people feeling so left behind by a political system that has broken its promise ever since time immemorial, and just desperate for something different.
That's fascinating because traditional political science would say Bernie and Clinton were much closer together, but viewed through the lens of, I don't know, trust, authenticity, outsider versus insider, Bernie and Trump were actually much closer than Bernie and Hillary Clinton. That's really interesting. All right, final question, and then I want to open it up for the audience here. So, you know, you guys lay out a very compelling argument for kind of a new culture within progressive politics and Democratic Party politics in terms of going out into rural America and building campaigns and building a movement. What, if any, relationship do you see between that mission and the kind of emerging, hey, we need to fix the system itself mission? I mean, obviously, Chloe, open primaries is one of those bridges, but broader than that, what's the relationship between fixing the system and fixing the culture of politics in the country?
Yeah,
Deep philosophical question.
That is a deep question. I mean, I think it's really tough to change the system if you don't have people in the system who are going to change it. And I don't think we have a critical mass of elected officials who are in it to change it. There are definitely so many, but there's not enough. And you need more than one or two per body or per legislature or per Congress to be able to push that conversation forward. You know, and I think Maine's political system is very different than other states, in large part just because we're such a small state. But, you know, being in the system, I'm not so convinced that the system is like that bad just in its inherent discrete parts. I think how it operates, how it works in the world is really destructive and, you know, disproportionately impacts people. But to me, that's because of the people inside it, you know, like not the system itself. So to me, it's about, you know, getting more folks elected who are really in there to change how the system works and building the movements that holds the system accountable when it is failing its duties.
John, I want to hear your answer.
You want to hear my answer?
Yeah.
Well, I think we can change the rules of American politics and it won't matter unless we change the very way that candidates and voters interact, and that, you know, we have to find new ways of building political life in this country. I really think the American people are related to, as we have one job and one job only, and that's to cast a ballot on election day. And that is missing so much creativity, positivity, innovation that lives with the American people. So I think it's kind of like a symbiotic, or I don't know, a yin and yang. We desperately need an upgrade of the political rules. Maine, I'm not surprised by your experience, Chloe. Maine has enacted a whole set of reforms going back decades. Most states are awful. They're just awful in every way that they do. They count the votes, who they let vote, the gerrymandering. I mean, it's a mess. But if we change those rules and we don't listen to people like you who are saying we need to do politics in ways that are much more about listening than just sending people these idiotic mailers, it's not going to be enough just to change the rules. So I'm eager to build that conversation about, I don't know, the rules and how we do politics in the same way. All right, we have questions coming in. Canyon and Chloe, I hope you've put on your thinking caps. First question is from Mike Ang in Oregon. He has a question about the Democratic Party of Oregon. Go ahead, Mike. You still there, Mike?
Unmute.
There you go. Sorry about that.
Hi, Mike. Mike, you're on a lag. You're on a lag, so start over. People couldn't hear you.
Okay. I'm going to turn off my video and maybe I'll have a better internet connection, hopefully, and you can hear me.
Okay.
Nod, John. Okay.
Yep,
So
you're good.
I am in Oregon and we are working on an open primary ballot initiative. And we're moving along the process to do that. And we just learned recently that it's been challenged to our Oregon Supreme Court. And lo and behold, the organization doing the challenging is essentially a coalition of public employee unions and kind of Democratic leaning nonprofit organizations. And they're the ones that are opposing an open primary system that currently disenfranchises all of the what we call non-affiliated voters, registered voters. Others call them independents, but we have an independent party. So they're non-affiliated voters. There's over 1 million of them in Oregon, and they are now the largest group of registered voters in the state.
Wow.
They've overtaken Republican registered voters quite a while ago, and they just overtook the Democratic registered voters. So my question is, if you have any advice on how to reach the Democratic Party establishment to help convince them to not disenfranchise, over a third of voters in the state.
Well, first of all, awesome work, go you. That's very exciting to hear, and sending you all the luck. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's probably folks who have more insight on this call than I do. When we were working on our open primaries here, the state party did have some hesitations about it, but we addressed them and everyone felt okay about it by the end. There were issues of like delegate count and all that kind of stuff that did feel a little threatening to the party infrastructure, which I totally understood, and I wanted to make those changes, but it was it was not an incredibly awful process to have that conversation with folks and fix it. So I don't have a great sense of how contentious it is between you and your state party, and I'm really sorry that's happening, because it definitely is in Democrats' best interest to support open primaries. But I don't know if John or other folks wanna chime in there.
I think what you said, Chloe, is very helpful. Even though, Mike, the Democratic Party is opposing the effort, they're not monolithic. And I think the hard work is to find the cracks and the chinks, and to not, even though they're doing something you don't like and I don't like, find a way to take the posture of, we're going to win you over. This is best for Oregon. You might fail. They might be, they might not go along with it, but we spent years in Maine chipping away at that opposition, and we eventually won them over. So find those Democrats that are with you and turn them into your spokespeople, and just launch a campaign and convert the Democratic Party. That'd be my advice.
Well, and we're trying to take a multi multi-pass strategy, not just relying on a ballot initiative, which is kind of out of frustration with the legislature, but also we are trying to identify those potential champions within the legislature that at least can start building some support within the legislature. Thanks a lot.
All right, we have a question from Catherine Maloney about communication strategies. Go ahead, Catherine.
Hi, I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about how, those conversations you're having at the door, like how do you keep those going with your voters and your constituents and not allowing it to get narrowed by kind of the way the media reports issues? Like there's no context and, just the social media or, gatherings like in public spaces. If you could just talk about how you kind of keep that rich conversation going with your constituents.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like honestly, it's just getting more and more difficult. And yeah, I mean, even between canvassing in 2018 and 2020, the amount of effort it took just to create a conversation between between two people with different parties. It was just, it was pretty shocking. And I fear that it will be even worse this year. But I think just really approaching the conversations with kindness and empathy, like really not going into them trying to persuade anyone or change a mind, but really trying to understand and respect what you hear. I think, and it takes a lot of energy from the person initiating the conversation to do that. But I think it might be the only way. And then while I'm in office, I'd make a lot of effort to stay in touch with my constituents and have constituent hours and, be just as responsive as I can be to make sure that I feel like I have a good pulse on what folks are thinking and feeling. But it's definitely very, very noisy and divisive out there. And it takes more energy than ever to calm it down.
Mm. Just a reminder, if you want to ask a question, type your name and your state and just a one-sentence summary of what you want to ask in the chat. And then we will get you in the queue and call on you to ask your question. Next question comes from Katie Usalis, a question about the impact of ranked choice voting in Maine. Go ahead, Chloe, Canyon.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go. My brain got fogged. Go ahead, Katie, to ask your question.
Thanks so much, John. And thanks, Chloe and Canyon. This has been really, really interesting. I've enjoyed listening and learning from you, all three. I was really mostly just kind of thinking out loud, but I am curious, as John, you were saying that Maine has passed a whole slew of reforms. I was typing that in the chat. So just thinking about how those different kinds of things that Maine has done maybe has created a dynamic in Maine that empowers legislators to represent their constituencies truly, instead of just trying to win. That's all.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of ranked choice voting. I think it has the power to go a long way in terms of the culture shift that we were talking about earlier. It was really cool to see. We didn't have multiple candidates in Chloe's races. It wasn't ranked choice for those, but seeing like the primary for the governor's race, for example, was really inspiring, where you had opposing candidates going out and doing canvas days together, being like, hey, rank me first, or rank the other candidate first and me second. And it created this dynamic where folks were a lot more hesitant to launch the negative, nasty attacks, because what if you alienate the supporters of that candidate and then they don't rank you highly on their ballot. So I think that cultural piece is important, as well as obviously the structural piece of making it more viable for third-party candidates, independent candidates, to run without fear of being, the spoiler. So I think that's really important. I also think fusion voting is a really interesting thing that there's a movement around, and that some states have, where basically you can get the nomination of more than one party. So like, for example, in New York, I think like the Working Families Party is really strong there, and you know, they'll nominate folks where it'll appear on the ballot that you're the Democratic nominee as well as the nominee of the Working Families Party. And I think that's another important reform effort.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Kathy Stewart in New York. Go ahead, Kathy.
Hi, John. Hi, Canyon and Chloe. It's so nice to have a chance to hear from you directly. And thank you, Chloe, for your work on open primaries in Maine. I've been thinking a lot about this theme we've been talking about so many Americans feeling abandoned. And I had the experience of moving from the Bronx after 30 some odd years in the city to rural America, to a farming community in Washington County, Shushan. And in both instances, what you really see is that both those communities have been abandoned. The rhetoric is different, right? But they both are feeling the failures in our public policy. And my question is how you both think about the issue of so many Americans now choosing to not affiliate with either party and to declare themselves independent. We do a lot of polling of independents, not scientific polling, but grassroots polling of independents all over the country, and ask people why they're making that decision. And a lot of what we get is people saying, I want to vote for the person, not the party. But I wondered in your work, and I have to say, I so respect how much you listened to the voters in your communities, and how much that informed the move towards open primaries. But I wondered how you think about that, and how you think about that in terms of what you're recommending the Democratic Party do. And it seems like there's a disconnect in some ways. But I wanted to ask you to talk about that.
That's such a good question. Thank you so much. Yeah. Canyon, I just lost my train of thought. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that comes to mind is just like it ought to be prompting a lot of soul searching in both parties of how things are going, and how turned off people are by the candidates that we keep running, and the polarization and the way that we're pushing people away. And I think for us, for everyone here in this room who's engaged in this effort to reform our political system, it's a huge opportunity. And I look at our generation, millennials, and the generations coming up behind us, and they are overwhelmingly not being drawn to identify with either of the Republicans or the Democrats. And I think that it's only a matter of time until we make some big structural reforms to address this. And there's a huge shift coming, and we just have to be ready to harness all of that power with strong organizing, like you all are doing at Open Primaries, and like other groups are doing. And so I find a lot of hope and opportunity in that.
Anything to add, Chloe?
That was perfect. That was exactly what I was going to say, but even better.
Sounds good. All right, our next question is from Ernie Bach in Florida. Question about mom, apple pie, patriots, and guns. Go ahead, Ernie.
Oh, okay. I had not expected to be called. Thank you, John.
I'm always throwing you curveballs, Ernie.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm used to them. Let me flip this. I put in my messages about our attempts over past election cycles to assist Democrats from the independent viewpoint. And we find that the Democratic Party just keeps shooting themselves in the foot. For instance, the Democrats keep talking about all the bad acts and the need for reform, and we need the open primaries, and they keep repeating over and over what we all know are the bad acts and the necessary reforms. But the Republicans are staying on message. And that's why I wrote down mom, apple pie, patriots, and guns. Democrats need to start talking like the independents do about the issues, not, if you'll excuse the expression, cry about what's wrong. You need to get on message, stay on message. And Chloe, what's your observation in your travel and talking to people about the difference between the Democratic message and the Republican message? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, Ernie. I never ate lunch today, and I have this beautiful bowl of food next to me, so I'm just kind of munching on it as we go along here. I was very close to writing my college thesis about how successful the Republican narrative and movement has been, and I think there's so many pieces of it that are really, I mean, it's for a bad cause in my opinion. But some of the elements of it I think are really powerful, like having a vision and a messaging strategy that isn't just about the next 2 years or the next 4 years, but about the next 3 decades. I mean, it's like pretty impressive how all of this stuff has come to be and how effective it is right now. And I think the Democrats, especially at the national level, are just kind of constantly playing catch up. And when you're playing catch up, it's a bit easier to criticize than to promote. And I hope that starts to change. And I think there are a lot of candidates and local folks doing organizing work for the long haul that are starting to change those narratives. In terms of what I heard from people at the doors, I think what you said is actually pretty accurate. There's just this sense that the Democrats are like pretty intellectual and urban and more focused on wonky policy and a bit more disconnected from the reality of rural folks, and that the Republicans are more speaking to working class people and really want to cut taxes. That's about how it falls down. And, I don't see it that way. I don't experience it that way. But it's hard to fight that narrative that's been out there for so long.
All right, we have a question from James in Illinois about moving a bill through committee. Go ahead, James. James, you still there? All right, we'll come back to James. A question from Madeline Cando. A question about moving change forward at the local level. Go ahead, Madeline. Where are you from, Madeline?
I live in Massachusetts.
Okay, go ahead, ask your question.
So my question was, I think that one of the problems with the incredible separation between the Republicans and the Democrats is that this whole system of the political system is based on 2 parties, whereas in many other countries in the West, there is a multi-party system. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to change the 2-party system because it basically creates itself. The longer it exists, the less chance a third party has to become a legitimate party in a country. So I'm just wanted to get Chloe's opinion on, and Canyon's, on how we can try to promote the first past the post system that America has And I know it's going to be very difficult because that's the only system that America has ever known. So I just wanted to have your opinions on that. I know it's a hard question.
That's what we pride ourselves here on, at the
Yeah.
Open Primaries virtual discussion, the hard questions. Any thoughts on that, Canyon or Chloe?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really hard. I think going back to like fusion voting and ranked choice voting as a couple of really important structural steps that we can make in that direction. You know, I think organizing around those things and getting those in more states is a really concrete way to move in that direction. But yeah, we're going up against a lot. It's going to be tough. I want to hear Chloe's thoughts, but also be curious to hear from you, John. You know, John's been doing this work for a heck of a lot longer than we have.
I just wanted to add one thing. The fact that every district is represented by one single representative, it's totally constitutional to expand the districts to include more than one representative. So has that ever been attempted in any of the states, including Maine, to increase the size of a district so that there would be more than one candidate representing that part of the state?
I know there's a bill in Congress for that, proportional representation, what you're talking about, Madeline. I don't know how much support it has. I know there's a growing conversation about that. I think that's healthy. Here's something, though, to take hope from, and this goes back to something Kathy Stewart was asking about and talking about. Here we are, a two-party system, and it's been a two-party system since at least the Civil War. And yet the largest group of voters are people saying they don't want to be a member of either party.
Yeah.
Now, that's huge. And I think that as I see it, the political challenge is, how do you create a voice for all the people that don't want to be in a political party? Now, maybe that will translate down the road into being a third party or a third, fourth, and fifth party. I don't know. But I think the starting place should be, there's millions of Americans, and the numbers are growing and they're accelerating, who don't want to be a part of either party. Can we create some voice for those folks and see where it goes? And I really don't know where it will go. Maybe it'll all funnel back into the two parties because they get their acts together.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it'll lead to the creation of new political parties. Maybe there'll be no more parties. I don't know. But as long as the independents don't really have any voice, it's hard to imagine the creation of new political alternatives in the country. That's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah.
I want to go to Kayla Sullivan in South Carolina. Advice for a young person going into the political field. Go ahead, Kayla.
Can y'all hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Hey, y'all. I know this is a little unproductive to the conversation, but with everything going on right now, people like me are a little bit discouraged. And I know, Miss Chloe, ma'am, that you're more established, obviously. How do you keep your head on straight? And how do you stay optimistic? Because I'm nervous and I'm not even working yet. So, yeah, just some advice.
Thank you, Kayla. Oh, I mean, honestly, it's something that I struggle with every day. And I mean, you probably have a lot of insights too. Maybe you can share. I mean, honestly, I find hope in my friends, and working with Canyon and just being with people who know that we need something better. I honestly don't know if we'll get there, but we can't stop fighting for what we care about. So we have to try and just kind of be as healthy and happy as we can in the process. I don't know. I don't know. Do you know?
Well, thank you for trying. I appreciate it.
Kayla, let me ask you a question. What do you do? What does your political involvement look like? What kind of activism are you involved in right now?
Okay, so currently, so my bachelor's is in political science, obviously, with a minor in law and society. So I'm more along the lines of I don't really work with, but I'm kind of like Miss Gwen with independentvoting.org and all of them.
Okay.
I'm kind of involved with them, but I live in Georgetown County, South Carolina. I don't know if you know where that is or any of that, but I work with our Democratic Party. And I don't do it because I really want to work with them. It's because the alternative, I don't care for. So I'm just trying to get some, experience. That's all I want. It's just an experience, really. So right now we're trying to reach out to young voters or getting the Black vote out in this country.
Got it. I would highly recommend you read Canyon and Chloe's book. To the point of staying optimistic, one of the things they do so well in their book is they talk about the pulling their hair out and the frustration and the difficulty and how to get through that. So that's a plug to go buy their book. It's really, really good, and it's very short and very readable. I think it'll help inspire you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, we're going to end with a question from Sarah in Indiana about volunteers canvassing. And I just have to show a picture because I got my start in politics back in 1989 as a door-to-door canvasser. So that's me. So I have a high degree of love and respect for canvassers. So go ahead, Sarah, ask your question, and this will take us through the end. You there, Sarah? I guess we lost Sarah. Oh, that was somewhat anticlimactic. Oh, well. But it is 4 o'clock. Thank you all for joining us today. Canyon and Chloe, thank you for a wonderful discussion. Reminder, go out and buy Dirt Road Revival. This is a really important book, a very impressive book. Share it with your friends, get the conversation going. They're talking not just about how to get Democrats elected, they're talking about how to change how we do politics in this country. And I think it's whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, I think it's an important read. Chloe and Canyon, anything you want to promote before we sign off? Any last words?
Just huge gratitude for you all taking a little bit out of your day to be here, and for all of the ways that everyone on this call is engaging to push things forward. Back to the question of hope, that's what I find most hopeful is being in these spaces of people who give a damn and are working day in and day out to change things. So thank you all.
Thank you. Go ahead, Chloe.
Oh, I just said retweet.
Retweet. All right, thank you, everyone. We have some great conversations coming up over the summer, including Jeff Bukes and I are going to interview Jonathan Haidt from The Atlantic. Other conversations coming your way. So stay tuned, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.